Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere dark, cold, and just a little too damp for comfort. You're in a cramped wooden house with no glass windows, just oiled parchment barely keeping out the wind. You're huddled near a fire that crackles with more smoke than heat, and outside a scream cuts through the quiet. Not one of pain, but one of despair. Someone else's candle just went out for good. You survived the Black Death, but now the real fun begins. There's the cough. Not yours, thankfully. It's your neighbor's kid. A dry, wheezing little bark echoing through the thin walls. You freeze. In your world, 1 cough is a warning, 2 is a death sentence, and 3, that means you're next. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't have the plague. Not anymore, at least. The black buboes that clustered along your groin and armpits have shrunk. The fever broke days ago, and you even managed to hold down a bowl of watery gruel yesterday. Congratulations, you're a survivor. Only, that's not quite the blessing it sounds like. Your street looks like a ghost town got tired and gave up halfway. Doors hang loose on rusted hinges. Dogs bark, but no one comes to shut them up. The baker's shop is closed and has been for weeks. He died, you think? Or maybe fled. It's all rumor now. No one makes eye contact anymore. Everyone walks with their sleeves pulled over their mouths. And even though your sores are healing, people flinch when they see you. You used to be the friendly one on the corner, always offering extra bread to beggars. Now you're just another walking corpse in waiting. You see, historians estimate the Black Death wiped out anywhere from 30% to 60% of Europe's population in the mid-1300s. That's not a typo. In some cities, it was closer to 70%. Imagine walking down the street, passing 10 houses, and knowing that 6 of them are empty forever. The rats are everywhere. Fat, confident, and strangely brave, they scurry across floors and nibble at whatever's left. Their fleas still hungry. You didn't know it yet, but those little bloodsuckers were the real villains in this story, hopping from rat to human like it was some kind of demonic relay race. And that cough, it's not even the worst sound. The real horror comes when you hear nothing, because silence means everyone inside is already dead. Your senses are in overdrive. Every smell is an accusation. Is that rot from the alley? Or your own bed sheets? Did your mother clean that cut on her foot? Or is that red line creeping up her leg a sign of the next round? You try to pray, but the church bells don't ring anymore. The priest collapsed mid-sermon last week. Now the church doors are barred shut with a crude charcoal X smeared across them. One curious fact that often gets overlooked: many medieval people thought the plague came from bad air or miasma, so they lit fires of herbs and sweet-smelling woods in their homes, hoping the smoke would purify their lungs. Spoiler alert, it didn't. But it sure made every home smell like a burning garden. Imagine surviving a deadly disease only to choke on lavender-infused smoke while rats scratch at your attic door. And then there's the fear. Not of death, you've already danced with that. No, it's the fear of being alone. Entire families vanished. Historians still argue whether entire villages were abandoned overnight, or whether the last to leave simply stopped counting. You don't know if your cousin in the next town is alive. There's no mail, no messengers. If you want to check, you walk and hope the road hasn't been closed by militia or worse, bandits taking advantage of the chaos. You don't sleep well anymore. Dreams are full of fire blood and coughing fits. Sometimes you wake up and forget you survived. You have to feel the crusted wounds under your arms to remind yourself. And here's the real kicker, you're one of the lucky ones. Yeah, let that sink in. You with your sunken cheeks, haunted eyes, and half-empty pantry are a success story. People will envy your scars because it means you made it. Now all you have to do is keep making it. The cough hasn't gone away, not yours, not the town's. Even though you're no longer hacking up bits of lung, the sound still follows you like a shadow. A distant wheeze from across the alley. A wet throat clear just outside your door. You tell yourself they're just sick from the smoke. You lie to yourself a lot these days. That lie becomes harder to maintain when the city watch comes pounding on your neighbor's door with boards and hammer in hand. You know exactly what they're here for. Quarantine, not the kind with comfy Netflix binges and sourdough starters. This is medieval quarantine, more like being walled up alive in your own home and hoping, really hoping that the infection doesn't spread too fast to kill everyone before the food runs out. You peer through a crack in your shutters, watching as they drag the old baker's daughter by the wrist back into the house. She's screaming that she's fine, but she's bleeding from the nose, and her lips are turning blue. The watchmen ignore her. They slam the door hammer up the boards and smear a red cross over the entrance in thick, dripping paint. And just like that, the house disappears from the world. They could be dead tomorrow, or maybe in 2 weeks. Either way, no one will open that door again until someone's brave or desperate enough to knock. Authorities in medieval cities tried desperately to contain outbreaks with methods that well ranged from sort of sensible to absolute horror show. Some towns hired watchers to sit outside infected houses for 40 days, hence the word quarantine from the Italian 40 giorni, meaning 40 days. Others weren't so subtle. Whole blocks were nailed shut and left to their fate. Some even burned the buildings to stop the spread. You heard what happened in Venice. Houses set ablaze, entire families locked inside, screams echoing across the canal. Maybe it's just gossip. Maybe it's a warning. The thing is, you can't even blame the city watch. They're not monsters, just tired men with masks made of linen and fear. One of them lost his brother last week. The other's wife hasn't spoken since her baby died in her arms. And you're not entirely sure you're better. Not really. There's this strange ache in your chest that comes and goes. A tension in your joints. Is it plague? Or is it fear? You've stopped telling people when you don't feel well. Because they don't bring you medicine. They bring nails and boards. Here's a fun little fringe tidbit: in some rural villages, families faked their own illness to get quarantined. Why? Because with no visitors, you didn't have to share your food with strangers or soldiers. Imagine pretending to be plague-ridden just to protect your pantry. Now, whether or not people faked sickness on a larger scale is still debated. Historians argue whether quarantine was truly enforced consistently, or if people bribed, begged, and bargained their way around it, depending on who they knew. You wouldn't be surprised. The wealthy merchant's house down the street hasn't had a knock in weeks, despite whispers of illness behind those silk-curtained windows. He probably paid off the guards, or maybe they're just afraid of him. Meanwhile, your cousin, a cobbler, was sealed inside because his apprentice coughed once while fetching water. And don't forget the traveling musicians, the ones who passed through last month. The city locked them in a shed outside the walls and forgot about them. You heard someone screaming songs for 2 days straight, then silence. The rats are back there now. You step outside briefly to gather rainwater. The sky's gray, the cobblestones slick, and the stench of death is just part of the air now. Your neighbor across the lane nods at you, no words exchanged, just a nod. That's as close to a hug as anyone dares give. It hits you then, the sheer isolation, the emotional quarantine. No church, no tavern, no market chatter or laughter. You're not just locked inside your home, you're locked inside your head. And your thoughts have grown sharp and unfriendly. You catch yourself staring at the boarded-up house, wondering, how long would it take to die inside? How loud would someone scream? Would the boards hold? And that's when you see the smallest thing move, fingers curling through a crack in the wood. A child's hand. Then it's gone. It would have been better not to see it. You go inside. You latch the door. You try not to think about it. You wonder if there will ever be a day you can cough again without terror, or sleep without dreaming of being boarded up in your home with a fever and no one to say goodbye. Probably not. But hey, at least you're not the one behind the boards. Not yet. You barely sleep that night. The boards from across the alley creak whenever the wind shifts, but you swear they creak louder when there's no breeze at all. You try not to think about the little fingers from earlier curling through the crack like some fragile plea for rescue or attention or air. When the bells ring the next morning, it's not for mass. It's for the flagellants. You hear them long before you see them. The dull thud of bare feet slapping cobblestone. The chant that sounds halfway between a hymn and a dirge. And then the snap, a whip cutting air and skin in the same breath, over and over again. You peek through a sliver in your shutter and immediately wish you hadn't. A parade of men in white robes, spattered now with blood, are marching in solemn rhythm through the street. Their hoods obscure their faces, and each one holds a scourge in one hand and a wooden cross in the other. They chant in Latin voices, rising and falling like waves crashing into desperation. These are the flagellants, and they've come to save your soul by beating the sin out of themselves. You'd heard rumors of them. They travel from town to town, claiming that the plague is punishment from God for the world's wickedness. The only cure, extreme theatrical penance. 40 days of marching, fasting, and self-whipping, often multiple times a day. The irony is thick. These processions meant to cleanse sin may have helped spread the plague further. Scholars still debate this, but let's be honest, sweaty, bleeding men marching town to town during an airborne crisis, not exactly CDC recommended. And the worst part, the townsfolk love them. They line the streets, bowing, weeping, tossing coins, and even joining in. You spot your neighbor's brother pulling his shirt off to reveal a pale back dotted with fresh welts. You wonder what they think will happen. That if they whip hard enough, God will blink and say, "Okay, you've suffered enough. Let's roll back that death wave." One of them stops right in front of your door. He turns his face up toward the sky, lips mouthing something between a prayer and a scream, then slams his scourge down across his back with a vicious crack. Blood spatters on the stones. He looks directly at your house. Through the crack in the shutter, you feel it. That stare. And suddenly you're not a person. You're a sinner. A reason for the plague. A problem to be punished. This is how it feels now. Everyone is either dying or blaming someone for why they're not dead yet. And if you're still alive, that's suspicious. A little-known tidbit. Flagellant movements got so popular that the church actually banned them. Yep. Pope Clement VI issued an order to shut them down, calling them heretical and dangerous. Fun enforcement in a crumbling world. Good luck with that. Your village isn't listening to Rome these days. They barely listen to reason. Later that afternoon, a small boy stands at your gate, eyes wide with wonder. "Are you going to whip yourself?" he asks. You shake your head. "My uncle says people who don't are hiding something." Then he runs off barefoot and grinning, chasing the procession as if it were a circus, which in a way it is. A very medieval, very bleeding circus. You sit in your doorway that night and think about how the world is twisted. Before the plague, these men would have been arrested for madness. Now they lead entire towns in devotion. Before sickness was a tragedy. Now it's a sign of divine judgment. And if you're not sick, then maybe you're not innocent. Historians still argue about the psychology of plague survivors. Did they cope by turning to extreme religion? Did guilt twist into hysteria, or did the sheer randomness of who lived and who died drive everyone to find some meaning, even if it meant tearing flesh from bone? You know what it feels like. It feels like the whole world has gone mad and you're the only one pretending not to notice. That night, you dream of a line of hooded men, their whips lashing, not at themselves, but at you. You wake up sweating, not from fever, but from the weight of invisible judgment. You survived the plague, but the guilt, that's only just beginning. You hear them before you see them. The wooden clogs clacking unevenly on the stones, the jangle of metal tools in leather bags, and the faint rustle of thick robes brushing against dusty streets. Then comes the smell. Not the smell of rot or decay, you're used to that, but a sharp, bitter, overwhelming mix of crushed herbs, rosemary, lavender, camphor, and vinegar. The scent doesn't cleanse anything. It just covers the stench of despair with a different flavor of doom. And then you spot him. The doctor. Well, doctor is a generous term. You've heard he studied in Paris. Or maybe he was just a barber once. Who knows? All you can see now is the mask. That bird-like, beaked monstrosity stuffed with flowers and spices designed to keep the bad air out. It doesn't really work, but hey, it's fashion and filtration. He moves slowly, deliberately, gloved hands folded like a funeral priest. Children scatter. Adults stare. One woman clutches her rosary and mutters something under her breath. The doctor pays no one any mind. He stops in front of a house with a black X smeared on the door. His assistant, barely more than a teen, with a cart full of pots and wrinkled cloth, follows behind, eyes wide, trembling. The doctor raises a long wooden cane and knocks 3 times. No answer. He doesn't enter. He doesn't check for signs of life. He just pulls a piece of parchment from his coat, scrawls something, and nails it to the door. You never find out what it says. The truth is, most plague doctors weren't there to heal you. They were there to record you. To take names, inspect corpses, count the dead. Some had training, sure, but others were volunteers, desperate men paid well because nobody else wanted the job. And when someone doesn't want your job in the middle of a pandemic that tells you everything. There's even debate among historians now about how much those famous masks were actually used during the height of the Black Death in the 14th century. Most evidence suggests the iconic beaked mask came into use much later in the 1600s. But people remember images, not timelines. And that image, the beak, the cloak, the cane sticks. You wonder what he'd say if he came to your door. Would he examine your half-healed buboes? Would he ask about your fever dreams? Would he recommend bloodletting? Or perhaps a poultice made from crushed emeralds and frog liver? Because yes, those were real treatments. You once heard someone suggest that strapping a live chicken under each arm could draw out the disease. Another swore by bathing in rose water mixed with vinegar and goat urine. You haven't tried it. Yet. But let's be honest, you've considered worse. The doctor walks past your house, never slowing. You should be relieved. You aren't. Because if he had stopped, at least someone would have acknowledged you're alive. You close the shutters and try to forget the image of his mask. You fail. Every time you blink, you see the curve of the beak, the way it juts forward like it's sniffing out your sins. Funny thing, those masks weren't just stuffed with herbs, they were symbolic. People believed the plague spread through the air, through miasma. The stink of death itself was infectious. They said so. Why not fight odor with more odor? Historians still argue whether the beak masks actually worked in reducing exposure. Some claim the long design kept physicians from breathing in the worst of it. Others think they were mostly for show comfort theater in a collapsing world. You get it. People need rituals. Masks, chants, incense, these are the guardrails against chaos. But nothing feels guarded now. That night, you light a sprig of dried sage. You don't know if it's medicinal, magical, or just something to keep your hands busy. You wave the smoke around the doorway, muttering a prayer you only half remember. Then you hear it a knock, not the doctor's, just your friend Tomas. He's brought you onions. They're shriveled and slightly soft, but you nearly cry at the sight of them. He doesn't come in, just hands them to you and walks away. You hold the onions like a holy relic. This is what survival has become. Avoid the doctor, fear the mask, cherish the onions, and pray hard that you never hear that cane knocking on your door. You line the onions up on your table like treasure. 1, 2, 3 each, the size of a small fist. Their skins wrinkled, their smell sharp and earthy. You haven't seen fruit in weeks, meat even longer. Your last scrap of cheese turned blue and fuzzy, then grew legs and wandered off, or so you joked to yourself. You didn't even throw it away, just buried it in the garden like a bad omen. You're hungry, always. Not starving exactly, just never full. And you miss the feeling of choices. What to eat, when to eat, whether to eat with friends or sneak a treat under the table. Now food is medicine, or currency, or bait. It's anything but joy. You remember the market before the plague, bright stalls overflowing with barley fish, apples, garlic, the scent of roasting meat filling the square. The cheese man used to sing. The butcher always added an extra bone for your dog. Now the market's closed, boarded up. The stalls collapsed weeks ago under wind and weather. And the butcher, you found his shop door open and his block still stained red. He didn't leave a note. Historians estimate that in some regions, up to half the labor force died during the Black Death. Which sounds like a statistic until you try to find someone to grind your flour or clean the well or farm. Because here's the thing about food, it doesn't grow itself. The reapers stopped reaping. The planters stopped planting. And even if someone did try to grow a garden, there was no one left to guard it. So people stole or fought or let it rot while they argued about who owned the land. And so you eat bark, literally. There's a trick to boiling tree bark until it softens into something chewy and vaguely bread-like. It's not good, but it fills your stomach. You've tried it, twice. You even mixed in nettles for flavor. You called it forest stew to make yourself laugh. You didn't laugh. There's also pigeon jerky. Don't ask how you catch the pigeons. Just know that once you've tasted salted feathers 3 nights in a row, you start dreaming of roasted goose and wake up biting your own sleeve. Want a weird one? In some places, people hung onions and garlic around their necks to ward off disease. Others sliced them open and left them on windowsills, believing they'd absorb the sickness from the air. You tried that too. Your house smelled like an alchemist's pantry for days. The only thing it absorbed was your dignity. You once heard about a nobleman who locked himself and 12 friends in a villa outside the city. They took their best wines, finest meats, and a troupe of musicians. For 2 months, they danced, feasted, and ignored the world outside. When they finally emerged, half the kingdom was dead. Historians still debate whether this was real or a legend born from envy. Either way, it doesn't help you much now, staring at your last onion and wondering if licking the knife makes it taste stronger. You venture outside hoping to find something, anything, to supplement your rations. The wind is sharp, carrying dust and ash. Your neighbor's goat got loose again. You consider catching it just for the milk, maybe more. But it looks at you with those yellow, judgmental eyes and bolts into the field. Figures. The village square is eerily quiet. A few figures shuffle past, wrapped in cloaks, faces hidden. No one speaks. No one shares. A man stirs a pot over a fire, and you catch the scent of something meaty. Your stomach growls. He turns away protectively. You pretend not to notice. Pretend you're better than begging. You're not. You trade one onion for a small hunk of bread that's harder than your boots. You eat it anyway. The chew pulls something in your jaw, but the crust tastes like memory-old meals with family soup nights, festival days. Funny thing is, you used to waste food, leave crusts, pick around the onions. Now you eat the skin, the stem, even lick the pot clean. And still you're hungry. The doctor never warned you about this part. Surviving the plague meant you'd spend the next year surviving everything else: starvation, collapse, desperation. There's no bakery reopening, no field being tilled. Just the slow unraveling of normal life into something that feels more like foraging than living. You sit on a tree stump with a sliver of beetroot dirt still clinging to the skin. You eat it raw. It tastes like iron and cold earth. You look up at the sky, cloudy and low. Maybe it'll rain tomorrow. Maybe you'll catch that goat. Maybe the next onion will be enough. You've gotten used to the emptiness, the silence, the absence of sound, where once there was chatter, hammering dogs, barking kids, screaming. Now there's only the wind whistling through half-collapsed rooftops and the occasional creak of doors that no one opens. But today, something's different. Shouting. Not the angry kind, not a fight over bread, or who stole whose chicken. This is louder, messier. A mob. You step outside just in time to see a crowd storming toward the edge of the village, pitchforks and torches raised like some festival gone terribly wrong. You can't make out what they're shouting until you get closer. Witch, she cursed the well, hang her. A woman old bent, wrapped in a ragged shawl, is being dragged through the mud. You know her. Everyone does. Her name's Agnes. She gathers herbs in the woods, knows which mushrooms won't kill you, and once helped your cousin's wife give birth during a thunderstorm. She's lived here for decades, but now she's a problem. You stay back, watching, not helping, because here's the ugly truth of survival. When enough people die, someone has to be blamed. Anyone. It doesn't matter if they make sense. What matters is that they're different. And Agnes has always been different. You hear one man say she looked him in the eye before his cow died. Another claims her garden's still green while his crops rotted. Someone else brings up that she talks to her cat too much. That seals it. Blame is contagious. One person whispers and the whole town shouts. Historians now call this scapegoating. It wasn't just witches. During the Black Death, Jewish communities were massacred across Europe, accused of poisoning wells, casting curses, or just being unnatural. Entire neighborhoods were wiped out, not by plague, but by paranoia. Some scholars still debate how much these mass accusations were locally driven and how much they were stirred up by authorities needing to distract from their own failures. Doesn't matter to Agnes. The mob ties her hands, drags her to the edge of town. They don't even bother with a trial. One man claims he saw her boiling toads. Another swears she coughed over his doorstep. Someone throws the first stone. You walk away, not because you agree, but because you've seen what happens to the ones who speak up. There was a man who tried to defend another heretic last week. Now he's missing. His house was found empty, the door ripped off its hinges. You go back to your hut, close the door, and try not to listen. Try not to feel the world tilting even further off its axis. That evening, the village is quieter than usual. You can still smell smoke. Someone burned her hut. You don't sleep, and in the morning, you find a small pouch on your doorstep, tied with twine filled with dried herbs. Lavender sage, a hint of rosemary. Agnes's handwriting scrawled on the side for strength. You stare at it for a long time, not sure if it's a blessing or a curse. This is the madness no one talks about. Not the sickness, not the fever. The madness of fear. Of needing a villain to make the randomness feel less random. Of convincing yourself that maybe she was to blame because the alternative that no one is worse. You bury the pouch under a rock behind your house, just in case. Funny, isn't it? You survived a deadly disease, but now you're afraid of herbs. You avoid the main road for days. The place where Agnes stood is scorched black. No one mentions her name anymore. One of the children, though. Tomas's niece draws a picture in the mud with a stick. It's a woman with flowers in her hair. When she sees you watching, she wipes it away quickly. Because even a child knows, don't speak of the ones who vanish. Don't say their names. Don't draw their faces. You want to think you'd have done something, said something, but you didn't. And that's what survival costs: silence. The first time someone accuses you, it catches you off guard. It's just a passing comment, a mutter. The sort of thing meant to slip by unnoticed, but stick like a burr under the skin. She survived. Her whole family's gone, but she's still here. Makes you wonder. You don't know who says it. Could have been anyone. The blacksmith's wife. That baker's apprentice with the squinty eye. You hear it as you pass the well, your bucket in hand, your breath caught in your throat. Makes you wonder, and that's all it takes, isn't it? Not proof, not even a real accusation, just wondering. The next day, you notice someone move their child away from you in the market square. The day after that, your name gets left off the list of recipients for the bread ration. By the third day, someone spits near your feet. Not on you, no, that would be too bold. But close enough. You wipe it off with your sleeve and say nothing. You don't want to make a scene. You're not Agnes. You don't talk to cats. You don't boil anything except water and hope. But none of that matters, because survival in this world doesn't earn you respect. It earns you suspicion. Everyone else's family died. Why didn't yours? You must have done something, or known something, or made a deal with someone or something. During the plague, entire communities turned on each other. In Strasbourg, 1349, nearly 2,000 Jews were burned alive in a single day, blamed for the plague's spread. Across Europe, foreigners, beggars, leapers, even monks weren't safe. Anyone who stood out was a target. Historians argue whether these purges were top-down, encouraged by political leaders to maintain control, or whether they bubbled up from frightened, desperate communities. Either way, they worked. Not to stop the plague, of course, but to give people something to focus their terror on. And now that terror is eyeing you. It doesn't help that you're quiet, that you keep to yourself. that you don't attend the gatherings anymore. But why would you? They're not celebrations. They're sermons of suspicion, collective prayer sessions laced with glances and whispers. At one of them, a woman stands up and tells the crowd that the plague is God's punishment for pride, that those who remain must cleanse themselves of hidden sin. Her eyes flick to you when she says it. No names, just eyes. You start sleeping with your door barred. You tuck your father's old knife under your straw mattress. You tell yourself it's just for rats, but you both know better. One morning you find a smear of ash on your door. Not paint, not a cross, just ash. You don't know what it means, but it wasn't there yesterday. You wipe it away and try not to tremble. It's not just you. Others have become scapegoats too. A traveling tinker who couldn't explain why his boots were dry during a storm. A midwife who lost one too many babies. A man who tried to sell lemons in a village where no one had seen citrus in years. Must be sorcery. You pass their houses sometimes, boarded, empty, quiet. And still the plague rages, still people die. So maybe someone new needs to be blamed. You catch your reflection in the well one day. Your face is thinner than you remember. Your eyes darker. The scar under your jaw from a childhood fall stands out more now. You look like someone who might be guilty of something. That's the worst part. You start to believe them. You question your own memories. Did you really just drink boiled nettle tea to fight the fever? Or was there something more? Was it the prayers you whispered to the saints? Or the way you buried that charm your mother gave you under the floor? You dig it up, burn it, just in case. You even start talking louder at the well, laughing harder when someone makes a joke. You force yourself to smile, to blend, to look like someone who belongs, but it's exhausting. Surviving is already hard. Surviving while pretending to be innocent of what exactly living? That's harder still. You start to wonder if the people who didn't make it were the lucky ones. They didn't have to explain themselves. It happens at dawn, not the sunrise, the digging. You wake to the dull rhythm of shovels breaking soil. Scrape, thud, scrape, thud. Over and over like a heartbeat underground. You rise slowly, joints stiff, throat dry, and open the door just wide enough to see. They're digging another pit. 3 men, silent, hooded, and gray, with dirt and grief, working in what used to be a garden behind the church. There are no prayers, no hymns, just the scraping. It's not the first pit. It won't be the last. You throw on your cloak and wander closer, drawn by something you can't name. A need to see, to know. As if witnessing it might make it more real or maybe less. One of the men glances up as you approach. Recognition flickers in his eyes, but neither of you speak. There's nothing to say. Just another day. Another hole in the earth. You help. Not because anyone asks you to, but because your hands need to do something. They're tired of clutching your stomach, your head, your fear. You dig until your shoulders burn and your palms blister. Then the carts arrive, 2 of them pulled by oxen too thin to live through another winter. The bodies are stacked like firewood, wrapped in rags or not wrapped at all. Arms dangle, feet poke out. One child's hand is still clutching a toy, a wooden bird, the paint chipped but visible. You blink hard and look away. The monks used to bless the dead. Now they barely show up. One limps to the edge of the pit and mutters something that sounds more like an apology than a prayer. He's pale, coughing, and gone before the first body is lowered. And you keep digging, because that's what life is now. Mass graves, plague pits became a grim necessity across Europe. In London alone, entire cemeteries were converted into plague burial sites, their capacity overwhelmed. Bodies were sometimes buried 10 deep, layered in quicklime, and covered without ceremony. But out here in the countryside, you don't have lime. You don't even have enough cloth to wrap the dead. You bury them with what they wore, what they held, what they left behind. Later that day, you return to your home and strip off your cloak, dusty damp, stained with something that might be blood or might be mud. You wash your hands in cold rainwater and scrub until your skin burns. It doesn't help. You still smell them. The sweet, thick scent of decay clinging to your hair, your clothes, your memory. You try to eat, but your throat closes. You try to sleep, but you dream of the pit growing wider, deeper, and calling your name. You begin to notice other things, too. The songs have stopped. No one sings anymore. Not even the drunk at the tavern window, not even the children. Especially not the children. They've become silent, too observant. Their games are darker now. A group plays plague cart in the square. One lies down, arms crossed. Another pretends to drag them by the ankles. A third throws dirt over their face. You walk past them and feel something tighten in your chest. This isn't how they should grow up. You remember being their age, chasing fireflies, pulling each other's hair, sneaking into the orchard, and blaming it on the dog. Now they ask questions like, how long does it take to die? Or if Mama's asleep with her eyes open, do we still bury her? You don't have answers. You pass the pit again later that week. It's covered now. A shallow hump in the earth. No marker. No names. You whisper a few anyway. You don't know who they belong to. Doesn't matter. Someone should say them. Someone should remember. That night, you light a candle and let it burn until the wax puddles over the table. The flame flickers dim but stubborn. You stare at it until your eyes blur. Then you whisper your own name, just in case no one else will. You feel it before you see it, a heaviness in the air. A tension, like the world holding its breath. The dogs are quieter. The birds fewer. And then on the third morning, someone knocks on your door, not with a hammer or a whip, but with a whisper. It's back. 3 words. You don't even need to ask what it is. The plague. Again. You survived the first wave. You barely made it through the aftermath. You buried the dead rationed food, bit your tongue, when people called you cursed. And just when the village started to blink its way back into something like normal, just when there were whispers of reopening the market, of planting new crops, it returns. Because the fleas never left. Because the rats didn't die. Because the sickness doesn't care that you're tired. The new cases are quiet at first. A cough here, a fever there. You hear of one girl with swollen glands, then 3 more, then 5. It spreads fast this time, faster, worse. There's a different energy to it now. Last time people screamed, cried, prayed. This time they just shut their doors and vanish. It's a silent surrender. The fear's baked in now. No need to explain it. And this time you notice something else. No one comes to help. No doctors. No monks. No watchmen hammering boards over doors. Everyone's too tired, too afraid, too few. The systems that barely held together the first time have crumbled completely. The second wave is an open wound in a body already bled dry. You pass a house with the door ajar. A child sits on the threshold, eyes glazed. You ask where her mother is. She just points inside. You don't go in. You leave a crust of bread on the steps and keep walking. It rains that night, hard and cold. The kind of rain that washes filth through the streets and into the wells. You try to collect water in clay bowls, but it comes out gritty, oily. You boil it 3 times and still it smells like death. There are fewer lights at night now. people have stopped burning candles. Maybe they ran out. Maybe they just don't want to see anymore. You sit in your house and wait for what you don't know, for the cough to return, for the fever, for someone to knock and tell you it's over. You remember hearing that in some towns, the plague came in waves for years. Not months. Years. Every time people thought it was gone, it swept through again. In some villages, it became seasonal, like a grim harvest of bodies. Historians still argue whether this was due to environmental changes, rat migration trade routes, or just bad luck. The truth is probably all of the above, plus a few causes no one even thought of. You think about running, leaving town, heading for the hills. You wouldn't be the first half the village fled during the first outbreak. But where would you go? The next town, they'd see you coming and bar the gates. Or worse, out into the woods. You've slept under trees before, sure, but not in a world like this. A world where every rustle in the dark could be a dying man or a desperate one. You stay and you wait, and still it spreads. You hear of entire households gone overnight. Not from the plague, but from despair. A man who drank hemlock with his children. A widow who walked into the river. You try not to think of the pouch Agnes left you. The herbs are long gone, but the memory lingers. For strength, she'd written. You whisper that to yourself now. Not as a prayer, just as a kind of reminder. A word you can hold on to when there's nothing else left. You wake one morning to find a mark on your door again. This time it's a circle drawn in mud. You don't know what it means. No one explains. You wash it away with boiled vinegar and tears, and you wait. The street outside your home doesn't look like a street anymore. It's a skeleton of what used to be dirt paths overgrown with weeds, roofs caved in windows, broken and never repaired. One house collapsed entirely last week, and no one even bothered to clear the rubble. The road simply curved around it, as if the village itself was learning to avoid reminders. You walk it anyway. Not because you're brave, but because you're restless. And because sometimes you need to see what's left. It's quiet. Too quiet. No kids playing. No market stalls. No sound of hammer on iron. Just the creak of abandoned shutters and the soft flapping of cloth in the wind, someone's laundry left behind, or a shroud loosed from a doorway. Towns are supposed to have life in them. Voices, clutter, movement. But this is like living in the skeleton of something that used to breathe. You pass the chapel. The doors are open, but no one's inside. The altar is cracked. Mice dart between the pews. A candle flickers at the base of a statue, but the wick is barely hanging on. Once you knelt in that chapel every week. You lit candles for your family, for your neighbors, for the world. You begged for mercy when your fever was at its worst. And when it broke when you lived, you whispered thank yous to every saint you could name. Now you barely step inside, because no matter how many prayers were spoken, the dead still piled high. And the living, they're just quieter now. Not more faithful, just more cautious. As if even faith could be infected. There's a house on the corner that no one's entered in months. Curtains flutter in broken windows. You remember the woman who used to live there. Bright scarves, loud laugh, always handing out pears from her tree. She's gone. You don't know where or when, just gone. That's how it is now. People don't say goodbye. They just stop appearing. One morning, someone doesn't open their shutters. The next day, their door is ajar. By the third, someone's already claimed the firewood stacked beside it. A few people are still around. The blacksmith, though he barely works anymore. Tomas's mother, who sits on her stoop and knits with no yarn. A merchant who sells bits of copper and bone like their treasure. They move slowly like ghosts, still tethered to habit. You nod at them. They nod back. No one speaks. Speaking feels dangerous. It opens you up, reminds you that you're human, that you need something. And needing something these days is a liability. Some historians believe that the Black Death caused entire towns to vanish, not just physically, but socially. People lost trust in leadership, in their neighbors, in each other. The basic structures that made communities frayed and unraveled. Some places never recovered. You wonder if your village will be one of them. You wonder if this is what the end looks like, not fire, not war, but slow forgetting. People slipping away one by one. Doors left open, names no longer spoken. There's a strange freedom in it. No rules, no expectations. You could leave tomorrow, walk to the next village, reinvent yourself as someone else. But where would you go? You return home before dusk. You light a candle just to prove you're still here. The flame flickers. You speak aloud, just a single word. Still, it echoes. The shadows on the walls look like people. Just for a second. Just enough to make your heart skip. You look away. Later you hear a knock. Not urgent, not desperate. Just there. You don't open the door, not because you're afraid, but because you are. Because this is how towns become ghost cities. Not with screams, but with silence. You weren't expecting to fall in love during a plague. Honestly, it feels absurd, laughable even. Like planting roses in a burning field. But it happens all the same. Slowly. Unexpectedly. Quiet as dust settling in an abandoned chapel. It starts with a voice through the wall. Your neighbor across the alley, 2 houses down, sings when she thinks no one's listening. Not loudly, not cheerfully, but soft and low, like someone humming to herself just to remember how her voice sounds. You first hear her on a gray morning right after the second wave begins. You're sitting by the fire, patching a hole in your boot with a needle so dull it's basically a stick when you catch it, a melody. Off key. Beautiful. You listen again the next day, and the next. You don't know her name. Not yet. Eventually, you begin leaving scraps of food on the stone wall that separates your yards. Not much, half a turnip, a slice of dried apple, the last piece of hard cheese you were saving. The next morning, they're gone. In their place, a flower, a real one, small blue, clumsily plucked. You stare at it like it's a miracle. It is. You start writing short notes, dumb things, observations. Saw a goat eating laundry today. Or is it just me, or does the sun look embarrassed lately? She writes back. You learn her name, Lanny. You learn her handwriting round, hurried with little ink blotches where her fingers tremble. You learn that she's lost 2 sisters and an uncle. That she used to make candles for weddings. That she hasn't laughed since the first funeral until your note about the goat. You don't see her face for days. Just the notes, the exchanges, the waiting. It becomes ritual, and you cling to it the way you once clung to garlic cloves and holy water. Then one afternoon you find her standing by the wall. She's thinner than you imagined, pale like you, tired like everyone. But her eyes are warm, and she smiles like it hurts, but she does it anyway. You don't touch her. No one touches anymore. Instead, you sit 6 feet apart, backs against opposite sides of the wall, and talk through it. Like prisoners with a shared sentence. Love isn't loud now. It's not grand gestures or long embraces. It's quiet presence. Listening when someone speaks. Leaving a warm stone where a hand can't go. Remembering the sound of someone breathing nearby and realizing you're not alone. Historical records show that people did fall in love during the plague. Marriages were rushed, secret meetings arranged. Some widowed multiple times before 30. Life was short, but that made affection all the more urgent. There's even a tale of two lovers in Florence who married over a garden wall during quarantine, never touching, only vowing. No feast, no guests, just words. Historians still argue whether these stories are true or romantic fabrications after the fact. But it doesn't matter, because whether or not it happened then, it's happening now to you. You and Lane build something in the silence, a rhythm, a routine. One day she leaves you a bundle, a sprig of thyme, a slice of bread, and a note that reads simply, "You make it easier." You don't cry, you don't. But later, when the wind howls outside and the shadows grow long, you whisper her name into the dark. She replies the next morning with 3 words etched in charcoal. "Still here, you." You trace them with your finger until the letters smudge. Yes, you're still here, and somehow, impossibly so, is hope. You used to be a cobbler. It feels strange to even think it now, like remembering a dream you once had about someone else. Your hands were steady, your tools sharp, your bench worn smooth from years of rhythm, cut, stitch, shape, polish. You had regular customers, a ledger full of names and plans to expand your little shop when spring came. Spring came. So did the plague. The shop stayed shut. Now your hands dig graves, haul firewood, and break frozen bread with a rock. You still have your tools hidden in a sack under the floorboards. Every now and then you take them out, not to use, but to remember. The knife still fits in your palm like a handshake. The awl still has that nick on the handle from the day you cut too deep and bled across 3 pairs of boots. You miss bleeding for that reason, but no one needs shoes when no one walks anywhere. When travel is dangerous. When weddings, festivals, and pilgrimages have all vanished. And even if someone did want a pair, they'd offer you a sack of turnips or a cracked pot as payment. So now you dig. Grave digging pays in food, sometimes in wine, sometimes just in the knowledge that someone will dig your grave when the time comes, after the Black Death. Europe saw massive shifts in labor and class. With so many dead, the surviving peasants and workers suddenly became valuable. Fields lay fallow, roads cracked. Nobles found themselves pleading for hands to rebuild what had been broken. In some places, this led to better wages. In others, violent uprisings. The old system's feudalism, serfdom class rules weren't built to survive a world with half the population missing. Historians still argue, did the Black Death empower the working class? Or just shift their suffering to a different kind of hardship? You don't know. You just know your neighbor who once scolded you for charging too much for heel repair now asks if you have extra firewood. You give it to him, not because he deserves it, but because you do. You've learned that clinging to pride is like clinging to snow, pretty but useless. Lena tells you once through the wall that she used to help her father keep tax records. Her handwriting was prized, her arithmetic sharp. Now she helps gather herbs and bandage the sick. Her fingers shake, but not from fear, just hunger. You ask her what she wants to be if this ends. She laughs. Tired, she says, but alive. You tell her you want to make shoes again, not because anyone's asking, but because making things feels better than breaking them. She replies the next day with a tiny drawing, a crude little boot with a heart stitched on the side. You pin it to your wall like it's sacred art. Survival strips you down. It takes your name, your profession, your place in the world. And then if you're lucky, it lets you rebuild from whatever scraps are left. You take out your tools, not to work, not yet, just to hold them. Because remembering who you were is the only way to imagine who you might become again. And right now, imagining feels like a kind of rebellion, the kind you desperately need. It starts with a cat, a sleek black thing with green eyes and a tail too proud for the times. It prowls through the village like it owns the cobblestones, slinking between collapsed barrels and crumbling doorways. Someone throws a rock at it. "Witch cat," they mutter. You flinch, but you're not surprised. The second wave has loosened something in people's minds. A thread has snapped, and now everything is tangled logic, belief, fear. Especially fear. One man now bathes in vinegar every morning at sunrise. Another eats crushed pearls, convinced it keeps the demons away. A woman draws protective circles in chalk around her door and refuses to step outside until the moon wanes. She hasn't seen the sun in days. It would be funny if it wasn't terrifying. The plague has made people strange, and strange people are dangerous. Someone paints stars and moons on their walls, hoping celestial forces might spare them. Someone else burns sage rosemary and an entire basket of stale bread in a barrel to confuse the spirits. The air smells like panic and seasoning. You'd laugh, but last night you caught yourself placing a sprig of thyme on your windowsill, just in case. Superstition spreads faster than the plague. In medieval Europe, astrology was widely consulted during outbreaks. People believed planetary alignments had cursed the Earth. Others blamed bad air comets' eclipses, or even the wrath of long-forgotten saints. Some carried charms made of mercury or arsenic. Others buried toads in their garden beds as warding tokens. Historians still debate whether these rituals were truly believed, or simply something to do in a time of helplessness. Maybe both. Humans crave control even if it's the illusion of it. The church tries to keep order, but even the priests are confused. Some say the plague is punishment for sin. Others say it's a test of faith. One bishop writes that it's the devil's breath. Another insists it's God's way of pruning the wicked. You don't know who's right. You just know that Father Joannes no longer shows up for Mass. And the new guy, he mutters in Latin so badly you're not sure if he's blessing you or cursing the bread. Then someone decides cats are to blame. Word spreads fast. Cats carry the devil in their fur. Cats walk on rooftops at night, clearly plotting. Cats stare too long at you, and next thing you know, your aunt's coughing up blood. The next day, 3 boys chase the black cat through the square. You watch from the shadows as they catch it, tie it to a post, and jeer. One draws a crude cross on its forehead. Another lights a torch. You turn away before it finishes. You see Lainey that evening. She doesn't say anything. She just hands you a small pouch, dried herbs tied with twine. For calm, she says. You nod. You don't ask what's in it. It smells like hope, though. Or maybe just not smoke. Which is good enough. You catch yourself tracing circles in the dirt near your door later that night. Not because you believe in wards, but because everyone else does. And that makes belief a kind of shield, even if it's imaginary. You wonder sometimes what archaeologists centuries from now will think if they dig up your home. Will they find the herbs and charms and drawings and think these people were fools? Or will they think these people were terrified and trying? Because that's all it really is. Trying to survive. Trying to understand. Trying not to fall apart when the world keeps ending in smaller and smaller ways. Lena writes you a note before bed. If you see the cat again, let it inside. You do, and that night it curls on your lap like nothing ever happened. Because some creatures at least still know how to trust. The children don't play the same games anymore. They used to run through the fields with ribbon kites and wooden hoops, laughing so loudly you could hear it echo between houses. Now they play in the dust, their voices hushed, their games darker. You watch them one morning from your window. 3 of them crouched near the well, reenacting what looks like a funeral. One lies flat in the dirt, arms crossed. Another mimes weeping. The third He's the grave digger tossing leaves over the body with solemn ceremony. You step away. You don't want them to see you watching. Not because you're embarrassed, but because you're not sure if this is just pretend anymore or memory. Children learn from what they see, and lately all they've seen is death. They talk about plague carts, like you used to talk about merchants. They argue over which kinds of buboes are the worst. One small girl draws a row of tiny coffins in the mud and names them after herbs. Sage, basil, thyme. You can't tell if it's grief or just the new version of play. Maybe both. You heard once that after the first great wave of plague, many children were left to raise themselves. With entire families dead, villages abandoned, and monasteries overwhelmed, kids scavenged food, slept in barns, wandered into cities looking for scraps or kindness. Some survived, others vanished. Historians debate how much this trauma shaped the next generation. Did it harden them, make them stronger? Or did it leave a wound so deep that it echoed for centuries? You don't need historians to guess. You see it in Tomas's son Joran. He doesn't cry when his dog dies. Just digs a hole, buries it, and goes back to sharpening a stick against the wall. You see it in the way the children flinch at thunder, always expecting that loud sounds mean more bad news. You see it in their eyes, older than they should be, like they skipped childhood entirely and went straight to remembering things no one should have to. One night you're walking past a shuttered home when you hear laughter. Not cruel, not manic, just genuine. It stops you cold. You peek through the cracks and see Lan with 3 children telling a story by firelight. She gestures wildly, and they giggle when she pretends to fall off a stool. There's no food, no music, no toys, just her voice weaving something gentle out of the dark. You don't go inside. You just stand there in the shadows and listen. And for the first time in weeks, your shoulders drop. Because if there's one thing children are good at better than adults, maybe it's survival through story. The next morning, you leave a carved figure by their door. It's rough, just a small bird whittled from pine. You haven't carved in months, but it feels good to use your hands for something other than survival. A day later, you see it hanging from a string above the well, fluttering in the breeze like it's about to take flight. The children wave at you now. Not every day, not for long, but sometimes, and that's enough. Because even in a world that smells of ash and rot and silence, there are still moments of play, of pretend, of remembering what it felt like to smile without consequence. And when the children pretend to bury one another, you remind yourself, they're only playing. Right, you wake up with sunlight on your face, not smoke, not screams, not the sickening quiet of a neighbor's house gone still, just sunlight. You blink slowly, the warmth foreign on your skin. It feels wrong almost. Like the world is playing a trick, and yet the birds are chirping. The cat, yes, the black one, is curled beside the hearth, purring softly. You step outside, half expecting to see another pit being dug, but the street is still. The air feels lighter. You walk to the garden. Lene is already there on the other side of the wall. She's kneeling in the dirt, sleeves rolled up, planting something green and stubborn into the earth. You don't speak, not yet. You just watch her hands work, pressing, smoothing, watering with fingers that once bandaged wounds and wrote shaky letters and handed you sprigs of thyme for strength. She looks up, smiles. Her eyes are tired but alive. You finally ask, "What is it?" "Beans," she says, "if they grow." You nod. That if hangs in the air like prayer. You help her plant the rest. No gloves, no tools, just bare hands and soft soil. You don't know if they'll survive the season, but you do it anyway. Because planting is hoping. And after all, this hope feels like the most rebellious act of all. Later that day, you walk to the chapel again. Not to pray, just to sit. The pew creaks as you settle in. Dust dances in the shafts of light through the cracked glass. Someone has left a basket near the altar. Inside bread 3 apples and a note, no name. Maybe kindness has started to echo again. You hear the children outside. They're not playing funeral today. They're racing stones down the hill. One trips, falls, scrapes his knee and bursts into tears. The sound is pure, human, undistorted by fear. You don't rush to comfort him. Another child does. A girl. She rips a strip of cloth from her hem and ties it around his knee. They go back to playing. You return home and light a candle. Not for the dead this time. For yourself. Because somehow, impossibly, you're still here. You lived. Not just survived, but lived. You made it through the coughing, the quarantine, the silence, the suspicion, the stench, the stories, the sadness. You buried friends. You made new ones. You shared onions and whispers and songs and fear and love. And now you begin again. It won't be easy, or fast, or clean. The world is smaller now. Some doors will never open again. Some faces are gone forever. But others remain. The people who nodded at you in passing. The ones who left food. The ones who didn't throw stones. The ones who stayed. And you stayed. You breathe deep. The air smells like turned earth and baking bread. Someone's making soup. You think it might be Tomas, or Lenu, or someone new. You don't care. You're going to plant more beans. You're going to carve more birds. You're going to tell the children that once long ago, there was a time when everyone forgot how to smile, but only for a while. Because in the end, even the plague passed, and you didn't. Wind down 300 words. So now, as the candles flicker low, and the night wraps around you like a worn blanket, let yourself breathe. In, out, softly. You've walked through a world unraveling, touched grief with bare hands, heard silence louder than screams, and still you endured. You stood in the ashes of what was and chose to plant something, even if it was just hope. Let the memory of Lane's herbs drift through your mind. The black cat's steady purr. The weight of an onion in your palm when nothing else made sense. Feel your heartbeat. Steady, present, yours. Yes, it sucked to be a medieval plague survivor. It sucked in ways few stories dare to capture. But it also meant knowing life without illusion, raw, trembling, but fiercely real. And now in the quiet of your room, centuries away from those broken streets and whispered fears, you carry that story with you. A reminder that even in the darkest ages, people still sang, still reached across walls, still left apples at empty altars. Close your eyes. Let the flicker of candlelight fade behind your lids. Somewhere the wind is moving through tall grass. Somewhere a child is laughing again. Somewhere someone is whispering, still here. And so are you. Sleep well. End of script. Sweet dreams.